Hello people of the internet, today I'm going to talk to you about Bloom filters. So if you're browsing the internet and you get a link to a malicious site and you actually click that link, then oftentimes you'll see a pop-up that says, hey, this site is really bad, you really shouldn't go there. And the basic idea behind how that works is that there's some other service like Google which actually has a list of all of the bad websites, and what your browser is doing is checking to see if the site that you're going to is on that list. But as you can imagine, if every single time you went to a malicious site, your browser had to query Google or some other service to figure out if the site was bad, that would take a really long time all the time. With a Bloom filter, we have this compressed version of the list of bad sites, and you can actually check that before you go and check Google. But one of the really weird things about it is if you put in a site and the Bloom filter says, I think this site is bad, it actually can't be sure. So now let's explain how this actually works. If you're not familiar with hashing, that's okay, but you should definitely try to learn about it first. The basic idea behind hashing is you can take something in and then get some kind of number out that's always going to be the same, but is also usually going to be very different from the hashes of other things. A really simple example of a hash function is just to say, take someone's name where A is equal to the number 1, B is equal to the number 2, C is equal to the number 3, etc., and just add up the values of the name. This isn't a very good hash function because a lot of people's names are going to produce a hash or a number that's very close to each other, but it kind of helps give you the idea of what a hash is. Really good hashing functions will usually give you a very large number, and the hash of different names will look very, very different from each other, so they're very spread out. So in a Bloom filter, you start out with an array of bits that are all set to 0. So now we have a small Bloom filter with only 8 bits in it. The idea is that if there's a 0 there, that means that the thing that you're looking for is definitely not in the Bloom filter, and if there's a 1 there, then the thing you're looking for is maybe in the Bloom filter. So here's the idea on how we insert something into the Bloom filter. First, we take the thing we want to insert, we hash it, and then we mod it by the number of bits we have. Usually when you hash something, you'll get a very large number. So in order to make sure that we keep that number in range, we mod it first. Say for example that I hashed my name and then modded it by 8 since there are 8 buckets. And I happen to hash and mod to the number 5. In that case, I would take the 0 and just turn it into a 1. And so now if we want to check if something is in the Bloom filter, we kind of go through the same process. We hash that thing, we mod it by the number of buckets, and then we check the bit at that location. So if we were to hash your name and then mod it by 8, and it happened to be equal to 3, then we would go to the third index, see that it was 0, and know for a fact that you were definitely not inserted into this Bloom filter, right? Whereas if you were to check for me, you would hash my name, mod it by the number of bits, go to the number 5, and then know that maybe I'm in the Bloom filter, but also maybe I was never inserted in the Bloom filter. The reason that it's uncertain is because we only have 8 slots. It's a mathematical fact that if you have, say, more than 8 things inserted in your Bloom filter, at least 2 of them are going to end up going to the same bit. So it's entirely possible that if you hash somebody else's name and then mod it by 8, it's also going to be equal to 5. So even though I've been inserted in this Bloom filter, it's entirely possible that the other person hasn't, but they'd have no way of knowing that. And there's a very similar thing that happens with websites in the Bloom filter too. If you go to a website that's malicious, your browser will hash it, mod it by the number of bits, which will usually be much, much larger than 8, and then check if that bit is either 0 or 1. If it's a 0, it knows for sure that it's not a malicious site, so it doesn't have to bother asking Google or some other service if the site is bad or not. But if it's a 1, then it can't actually know for sure whether or not the site is bad, so it has to double check. And so that's the basic idea behind Bloom filters. You can also extend this a bit by doing things like actually hashing the thing you want to insert twice and potentially turning 2 of these bits to 1. And similarly, when you go to check if something is in the Bloom filter, you also have to hash it twice and check both bits. But the simplest version is where you just check a single bit.